40 years of desert sand finally give way to the green banks of the Jordan River, and the leaders of two tribes halt the march to tell Moses they will not cross. The generation before them died in the wilderness, begging to see this border. Now, the men of Reuben and Gad stand on the very threshold of the inheritance, look across the water at the land promised to Abraham, and ask to be left behind. Their reason is not fear of giants. It is not terror of iron chariots. It is the grass under their feet. Picture it. The camp of millions is mobilizing for the greatest conquest in their history. The air is thick with the anticipation of 40 years of delayed destiny. Every eye is fixed westward on Jericho. But the leaders of two tribes are looking down. They are looking at the dirt of Gilead, tallying their livestock and calculating that the eastern side of the river is good enough. Why did the tribes of Reuben and Gad look at the culmination of a centuries-old covenant and decide that the grazing land on the wrong side of the border was better than the promise of God? The King James Version anchors the moment in Numbers chapter 32. Watch what the text does. Now the children of Reuben and the children of Gad had a very great multitude of cattle. And when they saw the land of Jazer and the land of Gilead, that, behold, the place was a place for cattle. Wherefore, said they, if we have found grace in thy sight, let this land be given unto thy servants for a possession, and bring us not over Jordan. Stop right there. Read that again. Bring us not over Jordan. It is a devastating request. 4 centuries of slavery in Egypt, 10 plagues, the parting of the Red Sea, the terror of Sinai, the manna, the agonizing death of an entire generation in the dust. All of it was for this river crossing, and they say no. See the scene. Moses is an old man, mere days from his own death, banned from entering the land himself because of a single strike of a rock. He has carried this stiff-necked people to the finish line, at the cost of his own inheritance. Now, these tribal heads stand before him, asking to take their portion early and opt out of the holy war. Targum Pseudo-Jonathan, an ancient Aramaic translation and expansion of the Torah read in the synagogues of antiquity, captures the insidious nature of this moment. I hold the Targum's expansion as their telling, a window into the ancient Jewish mind, not as canonical fact. The Targum expands the phrasing to emphasize that the land was explicitly a place producing herbage for cattle, highlighting how the sheer physical allure of the terrain blinded them to the spiritual boundary. They were not rebelling with swords. They were rebelling with pragmatism. Their vast herds had become an anchor, a weight too heavy to carry across the water. The cattle are the core of this mystery. Notice the sequence of the verse. The livestock are mentioned before the land, before the request, before the geography. The text makes sure you know their net worth before it tells you their location. The wealth they accumulated in the desert is suddenly dictating their theology. They have let their possessions draw the map of their future, reading, not inventing. The physical blessing became the spiritual chain. But Moses does not see a harmless agricultural request. A request for grass and water has just triggered the deepest trauma in the memory of Israel's greatest prophet. Moses is about to unleash a terrifying accusation, connecting these cattle owners to the darkest failure in their nation's history. What exact words does Moses use to curse their request, and how does the Hebrew reveal the true danger of their livestock? Moses hears the words, "Bring us not over Jordan," and the air in the command tent goes dead. He does not negotiate. He does not ask them to pray about it. He stares at the tribal heads of Reuben and Gad and issues a response that cuts straight to the bone. Numbers chapter 32, verse 6, in the King James Version. And Moses said unto the children of Gad and to the children of Reuben, Shall your brethren go to war, and shall ye sit here? Sit with that. 2 tribes, perfectly content to watch their own brothers bleed on the western shores of the river, while they tend sheep in the eastern plains. To understand how they reached this level of spiritual apathy, we have to look closer at what they were holding. Look at the Hebrew text underneath the English translation. The King James says they had a very great multitude of cattle. The Hebrew word used there for cattle is mikne. Mikne translates directly to livestock, but its root is the verb quana. Quana means to acquire, to purchase, or to buy. But it carries a darker secondary echo. In biblical Hebrew, it can mean to be possessed by the very thing you have acquired. Watch what the text does. The mikne, the acquired wealth, has acquired them. Their vast, creeping empire of livestock has grown so immense that it dictates their geography. The blessing of the wilderness has become an idol that demands they stop short of the promise. They are not merely asking to stay in Gilead. They are declaring that their acquisitions are more real to them than God's covenant. The ancient Jewish Midrash, preserved in Numbers Rabbah, zeroes in on this exact Hebrew phrasing. I offer it as that, one tradition's record. The rabbis noted a terrifying pattern hidden in the scroll. Whenever a man in the biblical text placed his wealth before his spiritual inheritance, his wealth became the exact instrument of his destruction. They point to Reuben and Gad as the ultimate proof. Because they loved their mikne more than the promised land, they would eventually be the first to be ripped away from it entirely. The cattle are a wall, a breathing, bleating barricade keeping them from the river. Moses sees the wall, and he sees right through it to the rot underneath. He recognizes this virus. He has seen it before, 38 years ago, standing on the edge of another border. He accuses them of doing exactly what the 10 unfaithful spies did at Kadesh Barnea, melting the hearts of the people with fear and discouragement. Numbers 32, verse 14. And behold, ye are risen up in your father's stead, an increase of sinful men, to augment yet the fierce anger of the Lord toward Israel. Read that again. An increase of sinful men. He is calling them a mutation of the original disease. The 10 spies used giants to terrify the camp. Reuben and Gad are using grass and comfort to do the exact same thing. Both methods keep Israel out of the land. But Moses knows what happens when Israel refuses to cross a border. The last time this happened, graves were dug in the sand for an entire generation. Now, the anger of Moses rises to a boiling point, and he lays out a terrifying ultimatum. If these 2 tribes do not pick up their swords, the blood of the entire nation will be on their hands. What brutal compromise is forged in the dust of Gilead? And how do the words of the tribes accidentally reveal a fatal flaw in their own hearts? The leaders of Reuben and Gad step closer to the old prophet in the dust of the Moabite plains. The accusation of Kadesh Barnea hangs in the air, thick and lethal. They realize Moses is ready to call down the wrath of God and leave them all to die in the sand. They have to pivot. They have to offer blood. So they strike a bargain. Picture the negotiation. They promise to leave their families behind, cross the Jordan armed for battle, and fight on the front lines until every other tribe has conquered their inheritance. Only then will they return. It sounds noble. It sounds like ultimate sacrifice, but the King James text records the exact phrasing of their counteroffer, and it reveals a terrifying inversion of the human heart. Numbers 32, verse 16. Watch what the text does. And they came near unto him, and said, We will build sheepfolds here for our cattle, and cities for our little ones. Stop right there. Look at the blueprint of their priorities. Sheepfolds for the cattle, cities for the little ones, flocks first, families second. See the scene. The men of war are preparing to leave their wives, their infants, and their elderly behind in a hostile frontier. The land of Gilead is open territory, a massive grazing plain with no natural barricades protecting it from the raiding empires of the east. In the face of this terrifying geographical vulnerability, their very first instinct is to construct walls for their livestock. They are speaking to the man who spoke to God face to face, and they accidentally confess their true God out loud. The Mikneh, the livestock, commands their first breath. The children are an afterthought. The ancient rabbis writing in Numbers Rabbah caught this chilling detail centuries ago. I hold this as their telling, not as proven fact, but the Midrash observes that these tribal heads loved their possessions more than their own flesh and blood. They prioritized the safety of their animals before the defense of their sons and daughters. Same desert, same name. The idol of wealth has completely rewired their affections. But Moses catches the slip. He accepts their military compromise, but he forcefully corrects their theology. In Numbers chapter 32, verse 24, he throws their words back at them, but he intentionally flips the order. Build you cities for your little ones, and folds for your sheep, and do that which hath proceeded out of your mouth. Read that again. Cities for your little ones, folds for your sheep, children first, animals second. Moses is trying to surgically remove the sickness before it spreads to the next generation. He binds them to a blood oath. They will cross the Jordan River ahead of the army, acting as a vanguard of shock troops, fighting until the land of Canaan is subdued. The deal is struck in the sight of all Israel. The armed men of the east will go to war, but the families and the endless, breathing ocean of cattle will remain isolated on the eastern plains. The geographic fracture has officially begun. A military pact has temporarily bridged the divide, but the physical separation of the river is already carving a permanent spiritual scar. The swords will cross the Jordan, but when the conquest ends and the men of the east go home, the rushing water will breed a terrifying paranoia. How does a pile of stones on the banks of the Jordan nearly ignite a bloody civil war among brothers? 7 years of Canaanite blood dry on their swords, and Joshua finally releases the shock troops of the east to return home. The conquest is over. Jericho is ash. The giants of Hebron are dead. The armed men of Reuben, Gad, and the half-tribe of Manasseh have kept their bloody oath to Moses. Now, they march back toward the Jordan River to reunite with the families and the massive herds of cattle they left behind. But as they stand on the western bank, staring across the rushing water toward the plains of Gilead, the geography suddenly terrifies them. The river no longer looks like a crossing. It looks like a severing line. Before they step foot in the water, they panic. They construct a towering, unmissable structure on the riverbank. Joshua chapter 22, verse 10, in the King James Version captures the exact moment. And when they came unto the borders of Jordan, that are in the land of Canaan, the children of Reuben and the children of Gad, and the half-tribe of Manasseh built there an altar by Jordan, a great altar to see to. Stop right there. A great altar to see to. A massive, imposing monument visible from miles away. The reaction from the rest of the nation is instantaneous and violent. The Western tribes hear of the structure, and they do not send a diplomatic envoy. They assemble an execution squad. Joshua 22:12 reads, "And when the children of Israel heard of it, the whole congregation of the children of Israel gathered themselves together at Shiloh to go up to war against them." Civil war. Flavius Josephus, the first-century historian, details this fractured moment in the Antiquities of the Jews. I hold this as his telling, one ancient Jewish record, not as canonical truth. Josephus describes the intense, almost feral suspicion of the Western tribes. They were entirely convinced that the moment the Eastern men prepared to touch their beloved grazing lands again, they had abandoned Yahweh for the foreign gods of the soil. The cattle had already pulled them out of the promised land. The Western tribes assumed it had now pulled them out of the covenant entirely. But watch what the text does. The Western armies marched to the river, ready to slaughter their own brothers, only to discover a shocking reversal. The altar has no blood on it, no fire, no ash. It is completely empty. Picture it. The Eastern leaders weep. They explain they built the replica not for sacrifice, but out of sheer, undeniable dread. They confess their fear, that in the generations to come, the Western tribes will point at the Jordan River and sever them from the nation entirely. They quote their own nightmare in Joshua 22:24, terrified that the Western children will say, "What have ye to do with the Lord God of Israel?" The altar, which they name Ed or Witness, is a tragic physical apology. By choosing the pasture lands of Gilead for their livestock, they geographically isolated themselves from the tabernacle. They traded the presence of God for grass, and now they are desperately stacking stones on a riverbank just to prove they still belong. The swords are lowered, and the civil war is halted. The men cross the water and return to the cattle they loved so much, but the geographic isolation is now permanent. The Jordan River rolls on, a watery wall between the tribes of the east and the sanctuary of the west. Out in the eastern steppes, there are no natural mountain defenses, only wide-open plains. When the most brutal, skin-flaying empire of the ancient world begins its march toward Israel centuries later, which tribes are the very first to face the iron chariots? 800 years after the crossing of the Jordan, the dust on the eastern horizon does not announce rain, but the iron chariots of Assyria. Tiglath-Pileser III marches his imperial army across the open pasture lands of Gilead, and there are no mountain fortresses to stop him. The geographic isolation the tribes of Reuben and Gad chose for their cattle has left them utterly exposed. The grass that made them rich is about to become a killing floor. See the scene. Jerusalem is protected by jagged ravines and steep ascents, but the eastern plains are flat, open, and undefended. The tribes built sheepfolds for their cattle, but sheepfolds cannot hold back an empire that skins its enemies alive. The brutal reality of their ancient compromise is finally demanding blood. 1 Chronicles chapter 5, verses 25 and 26, in the King James Version, records the fatal blow, "And they transgressed against the God of their fathers, and went a-whoring after the gods of the people of the land. And the God of Israel stirred up the spirit of Pul, king of Assyria, and the spirit of Tilgath-Pilneser, king of Assyria, and he carried them away, even the Reubenites, and the Gadites, and the half-tribe of Manasseh, and brought them unto Halah, and Habor, and Hara, and to the river Gozan, unto this day." Stop right there. Read that again. He carried them away. They are the very first to fall, long before the rest of the northern kingdom of Israel is conquered. Long before Jerusalem is besieged by Babylon, Reuben and Gad are swallowed up. Their geography sealed their doom. Look at the Hebrew underneath the English translation. The King James says the Assyrian king carried them away. Turn that back into the original language. The word is gala. It does not simply mean to deport or relocate. It means to strip naked, to uncover completely, to leave utterly bare. Sit with that. The Mikne, the massive, creeping empire of livestock that covered their hills and anchored their hearts, is seized. The vast wealth that possessed them is plundered in a single afternoon. The sheepfolds they built before they built cities for their children are burned to ash. The families they left behind in the open plains are chained together and dragged north, stripped bare. Reading, not inventing. The ancient rabbis writing in Numbers Rabbah recorded a haunting, terrifying conclusion about this exact verse in Chronicles. I offer it as that. One tradition's record. The Midrash traces the thread of their destruction straight back to the riverbank in Moses' day. It states plainly, because they separated themselves from their brethren for the sake of their possessions. Therefore, they were the first of all the tribes to go into exile. Picture it, the men of Reuben and Gad marching in chains toward the river Gozan, hundreds of miles away in a foreign wasteland. They look back one final time toward the Jordan River they refuse to cross. The altar of Ed is a silent pile of stones in the distance. They traded the covenant of Abraham for cattle, and now they have neither. They have become a ghost story. The tribes vanish into the Assyrian machine, erased from the land forever. But the geography they abandoned is still holding a dark, unresolved energy, because the exact plot of ground where they built their sheepfolds is about to become the staging ground for an even deeper spiritual warfare centuries later. What stalks the empty plains of Gad when the New Testament opens its eyes? A wooden boat scrapes the gravel on the eastern shore of the Sea of Galilee, and Jesus steps into a graveyard. 14 centuries have passed since Moses stood in the dust of Moab. The Assyrian Empire is gone. The Babylonians are gone. But the geography on the wrong side of the Jordan River is still holding a dark, familiar weight. Mark chapter 5, verse 1, in the King James Version, sets the location. And they came over unto the other side of the sea, into the country of the Gadarenes. Stop right there. Listen to that name. Gadarenes. The territory of Gad. This is the exact plot of earth Reuben and Gad claimed centuries ago. The grassy plains of Gilead. The pasture land they traded their sacred inheritance to keep. When the Son of God steps onto this specific dirt, he is instantly met by a man possessed by a legion of demons, screaming from the tombs. But watch what the text does. The demons are not the only things occupying the ancient inheritance of Gad. The King James anchors the economy of the region in verse 11. Now there was there nigh unto the mountains a great herd of swine feeding. Sit with that. A great herd. The Mikne, the physical obsession with livestock. Centuries after the Assyrians stripped the Israelites bare, the eastern plains are still defined by massive herds. But the clean sheep and cattle of Moses' day have mutated into 2,000 unclean pigs. Flavius Josephus records that Gadara had become a completely Hellenized Greek city by the 1st century, a Decapolis stronghold severed from the covenant of Yahweh and devoted to foreign commerce. I offer it as that, one historian's record of the soil. The people living there are no longer the 12 tribes, but the spiritual DNA of the region has not changed one violent inch. Picture it. The demons beg Jesus not to send them out of the country. They are geographically anchored to the eastern bank. So Jesus casts the legion into the ultimate unclean livestock. The entire herd of 2,000 pigs stampedes down a steep cliff and drowns in the black water of the sea. The sprawling, breathing wealth of the region is instantly obliterated. How do the people of the Gadarenes react when the Messiah stands on their shore and frees a man from hell? Do they fall to their knees in the gravel? Mark 5:17 records the tragedy. And they began to pray him to depart out of their coasts. Read that again. Depart out of their coasts. Same geography, same exact choice. In Numbers 32, the leaders of Gad looked at Moses, pointed at their massive herds, and said, "Bring us not over Jordan. Do not bring us into the Holy Land. It threatens our grazing space." Now, 1400 years later, the people of that same region look at Jesus, look at the drowned ruin of their livestock, and say, "Leave our borders. You are costing us our wealth. Livestock first. The presence of God second. The idol of the eastern bank never died. It just waited in the dirt. The cattle that kept the ancient tribes out of the promised land morphed into the swine that pushed the Savior back into the boat. two rejections on the same exact soil, separated by 14 centuries of blood and exile. But as Jesus steps back onto the boat to leave the territory of Gad behind, he does something completely unexpected with the man he just delivered. Why does the man who lived among the tombs suddenly receive a command that no one in the western tribes was ever given? The wood of the boat groans against the gravel as Jesus prepares to cross the water back to the western shore. The townspeople of the Gadarenes are standing near the drowned ruin of their wealth, waiting in terror for him to leave. But the man who was possessed, the man now sitting clothed and in his right mind, wades into the water and begs to go with him. Mark chapter 5, verses 18 and 19 inches, the King James Version, captures the exact exchange. And when he was come into the ship, he that had been possessed with the devil prayed him that he might be with him. Howbeit Jesus suffered him not, but saith unto him, Go home to thy friends, and tell them how great things the Lord hath done for thee, and hath had compassion on thee. Stop right there. Jesus suffered him not. He tells him no. See the scene. For over 1,000 years, the eastern bank of the Jordan was a place of voluntary exile. The ancient tribes of Reuben and Gad begged Moses to let them stay there for the sake of their cattle. They chose the dirt over the presence of God. Now, a man stands on that exact same soil and begs for the opposite. He wants to leave the dirt. He wants the presence of God. But Jesus commands him to stay behind. It is a complete reversal. Why leave him? Because the eastern plains are spiritually barren. The ancient inheritance of Gad has mutated into the Decapolis, a federation of pagan Greek cities utterly disconnected from the covenant. I hold the historical record of the Decapolis as just that, history, but the geography is undisputed. The region is totally dark. Jesus is leaving, but he refuses to leave the territory empty. Watch what the text does. Centuries earlier, in Joshua 22, the men of the east built the altar of Ed. They dragged massive stones to the edge of the Jordan River to build a towering, silent monument, just to prove they still had a connection to the God of the West. It was a dead structure born of paranoia and geographic isolation. Jesus does not build a stone altar in the land of Gad. He leaves a living, breathing witness with a pulse. The man who used to cut himself with stones is now the only monument the eastern plains need. In Mark 5:20, the Greek word used when the man begins to publish his story is keriso. It means to herald, to proclaim as a public crier. He becomes the very first missionary to the Gentile territory, entirely alone on the wrong side of the river. The Mikne, the sprawling idol of the livestock, is rotting at the bottom of the sea. The false god of the plains is dead. The ground has finally been cleared. A lone herald now walks the hills of Gad, the first light shining in the territory that traded its birthright for grass. But to understand the full weight of the darkness that hung over these plains for centuries, we have to return to the man who saw it coming. What ultimate, terrifying reality did the tribes of the East miss when they looked at the Jordan River and decided they had gone far enough? Go back now to the riverbank where this film began. 40 years of desert sand giving way to the rushing waters of the Jordan. The old prophet standing in the dust, days away from his own death. The leaders of Reuben and Gad looking down at the green plains of Gilead, tallying their massive herds and speaking the most fatal words in their history. Numbers 32, verse 5. Bring us not over Jordan. You have read that scene before. But tonight, that grass is not just grass. And that river is not just a geographic boundary. When you look at those tribal heads now, you are looking at men who are already in chains. Watch what the text does. The Mikne has them. The creeping empire of livestock they acquired in the wilderness has completely acquired them. It has tricked them into building a spiritual wall centuries before the physical walls of their sheepfolds are burned to ash by an Assyrian king. Picture it. They thought they were laying claim to the ultimate prime real estate. They thought they were securing generational wealth for the children they left behind. In reality, they were meticulously drawing the map of their own exile. They got exactly what they asked for, and the soil swallowed them. The obsession with cattle became the paranoia of the altar of Ed. The isolation of the altar became the open, undefended plains. The undefended plains became the killing floor of Tiglath-Pileser III, and the empty geography they left behind became the demon-haunted graveyard of the Gadarenes 14 centuries later. The river rolls on. It still separates the inheritance from the wilderness. The tribes of the East looked at the water and decided the cost of crossing was too high, never realizing the cost of staying behind was their very existence. We can trace the tragic bloodline of their choice all the way to the feet of the Messiah. We see exactly what the land of Gilead became when the presence of God was traded for the commerce of swine. But the final fate of the men who were carried away into the east remains a shadow. The Book of Chronicles tells us they were dragged to the river Gozan and stripped bare. But the scroll goes completely silent after that. Did any of them remember the blood oath of Moses in the dark? Did the children of Reuben and Gad ever cry out for the God of the West from the Assyrian wasteland? The biblical record closes its eyes. The desert is still holding the rest. I hold this geographic through line as one reading, not the final word. The ancient texts give us the fracture, not always the repair. If you made it to the end of this journey, comment the word "watched" down below. Subscribe to the channel if you want to keep tracking these hidden geographic threads through the ancient texts. And send this to one specific person who loves biblical history but has never heard the dark truth. Of the 2.5 tribes, they built walls for their wealth but left their souls in the open.